You wanted the best. You've got the best podcast. The hottest podcast in the world. The Chris Voss Show, the preeminent podcast with guests so smart you may experience serious brain bleed. The CEOs, authors, thought leaders, visionaries, and motivators. Get ready. Strap yourself in. Keep your hands, arms, and legs inside the vehicle at all times, because you're about to go on a monster education roller coaster with your brain. Now, here's your host, Chris Voss.
Hi, folks. Chris Voss here from thechrisvossshow.com, thechrisvossshow.com. Hey, we certainly appreciate you guys tuning in. Thanks for being here. We got an amazing author and guest on the show, and an astronaut, I should say. You're going to really excited to hear his story. He's written his first book, memoir, that's come out on April 5th, 2022. In the meantime, go subscribe to all the channels on the Chris Voss Show. Go to goodreads.com/Chris Voss. See everything we're reading or reviewing over there in my books. Go to youtube.com/Chris Voss to see the video version of this. All our groups on Facebook, LinkedIn, Twitter, Instagram as well. The new book that just came out, as I mentioned, April 5th, 2022, Never Panic Early, and Apollo 13's Astronaut's Journey by Fred Haise. He's going to be on the show today talking with us about what he did. And unless you've been living under a rock somewhere for the past 52 years, you haven't seen the Tom Hanks movies, the different Apollo 13 movies and documentaries, and just all the wonderful stuff that NASA's been doing all these years, you should have heard about him. He is a former U.S. Air Force and Marines Corps pilot and NASA astronaut, most famous for his role in the Lunar Module Pilot for the nearly catastrophic Apollo 13 mission. He is an X-Fighter pilot and selected for NASA's astronaut program in 1966, served as backup for the Lunar Module for Apollo 8 and Apollo 11 missions, and then he played a key role in NASA's space shuttle program after Apollo 13. Welcome to the show, Fred. How are you doing, sir?
I'm doing fine. I'm over here in Houston. It's probably a little warmer here than where you are.
Yeah, we had snow yesterday. Can you believe that? In Utah.
We get snow about every 14 years, I think.
I'm moving to Houston next. Well, welcome to the show. We certainly appreciate you coming. I mean, it's an honor. I was born in 1968. I grew up looking at the black and white pictures of Neil Armstrong landing on the moon and just trying to figure it all out. I remember watching old people watching the old black and whites. Of course, I grew up on a black and white TV. So it's an honor to have you here. Thank you for coming.
Glad to join you, and hope we can talk a little bit. As you mentioned, so much has been done and written and the movies and about Apollo 13. The book, obviously, it's not focused entirely on that. So in fact, I think a couple of chapters about all I spend on Apollo 13 and tried to work in a few things that maybe hadn't been covered before.
There you go. Is there any .coms or places you want people to follow you on the interwebs?
No,
okay.
not at the time.
Okay, so people can pick up the book wherever fine books are sold, pre-order it or order it now. So is this would you call this a memoir then of your life and experience?
Yes, yeah. It starts with my growing up and born in Biloxi, Mississippi, and in that period, I didn't just want to talk about my experiences during that period, but also to give a flavor of what life was like at those times and what the economy was like. I talked to pricing of things, so it gives a picture of how things have changed over the years.
And you've lived a life of historic precedents. You've done a lot of things in your life. We'll even get into some of you had a plane crash at one point where you were burned over 65% of your body, I believe. You've been on a couple adventures, sir.
Yes, I have, and I've been very fortunate because I'm now 88 years old and I'm still here.
Well, that's good. That's good. We're happy for that. So, how did your life begin? How did you begin this journey? If you want to touch on that.
Well, as I said, I was born in a small town, Biloxi, Mississippi, on the Gulf Coast. About 14,000 people when I was born and raised, at least through elementary school. Along came to World War II. That was the first dramatic change in the particular area when two airfields, Keesler Air Force Base and Gulfport Base, was opened during World War II, and all at once there was over 100,000 Army Air Corps airmen now flooding the Gulf Coast, including Biloxi, which dramatically changed the climate there. The thing changed again later in life with the growth of casinos. Mm-hmm. There's a very large number of casinos all along the Mississippi Gulf Coast. I think the square footage of the total number of those casinos probably equals what you'd find in New Jersey with the casinos there, at least the square footage. Mm-hmm. So that obviously has also changed the climate. It's no longer a sleepy little 14,000 population town anymore.
Yeah, yeah. And so what shapes your life to where you got interested in working with NASA? What led you up to those sort of roads?
Well, what started me down that trail was the Korean War. Mm-hmm. I had wanted to serve my country, and my dad had recommended that I join something that would lead to a commission, officer's commission. And at the time, with 2 years of college I had and 18 years old, the only program that fit was the Naval Aviation Cadet Program. I had never flown in an airplane, never been even sitting in an airplane on the ground. So it wasn't like many in the astronaut program I know talk about their youth and they were so interested in flying, and I was not. So I was off on a different tangent. But it was one of these things where the first time Hank Chenaud, my first flight instructor, took me up in an airplane, it just hit me right then that, boy, this is something. And now my life has changed. I'm no longer a journalist, which I was majoring in the first 2 years of college. It's going to be something in aviation. Now, you have to realize at the time we're talking about is 1952. I went in, and there was no NASA. It was then NACA, which was doing a lot of testing, but strictly on aircraft at the time at various NASA centers. Mm-hmm. So there was no NASA and there was no space program. But that started me thinking about what next from being a Marine fighter pilot in two Marine fighter squadrons I served to become a test pilot, mainly from reading books. And I talked to squadron commander, ops officer, and thought that would be something to head toward next. And looking at the requirements for the resume, decided I needed to go back to school and finish, although with a degree in engineering. Mm-hmm. And that's what I did next to the University of Oklahoma. Flew in the Air Guard, Oklahoma Guard, while I was there. And next decided to start applying. I applied to some companies, but also my squadron commander recommended, when we first talked, to NACA, N-A-C-A. But by then it become, in 58, I think it was, it became NASA. Mm-hmm. And the first 7 astronauts were chosen. So I did apply at several NASA centers and was accepted at Lewis Research Center in Cleveland, Ohio, which is now named after John Glenn Research Center.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So was there something that appealed to you about, flight or being a test pilot? Was there something that you really, captured your interest?
Well, it was mainly being above and looking down at things and clouds. And, it's even from low altitudes I was flying at that time, although some of the jets I flew, you'd be at 40,000 feet or so. But it was magical. And the test flying, the military flying was interesting. And the task I had, I was a fighter squadron, and did a lot of training, air-ground support, deploying weapons, bombs, rockets, strafing, etc. And I enjoyed that. And testing was, as I looked forward to it, would be interesting because particularly with NHCA or NASA as a research pilot, you would be using airplanes and not necessarily brand new airplanes, but airplanes modified to test some new feature that would add to increased performance of a particular aircraft or safety. Mm-hmm. And so to me, it was going to be rewarding in that sense as well.
Mm-hmm. I always love when you're flying an airplane, that first moment that the airplane, gets taken up by the wind. You feel that movement and you're like, we're off the ground now. And then, like you said, you're over the clouds and you get an impact that if only the Wright brothers could see what everything had become that they were dreaming of.
Yeah. I mean, it's incredible how far we've gone since those days. You mentioned the Wright brothers. Mm-hmm. In less than a century, we were on the moon.
Yeah, spinning around.
Yeah, who would ever thought that?
So, did you get a thrill from doing the experimental planes? I know that there's the danger there. Sometimes there's a lot of wrecks.
Well, there's danger, obviously, in any flying. Mm-hmm. Even airliners have troubles occasionally. But maybe statistically a little more because we were dealing with some cases modifications and trying out things that had not been tried out before. But it's like just as I did in the astronaut program, even in the aircraft test, we planned with a development of a test plan ahead of time, not just myself or the pilots, but with the test engineers and those that were sponsoring the program to figure out how we were going to approach it and take it in, say, smaller bites. Mm-hmm. So we didn't try to go too far too fast like Hollywood does in movies, but to approach it from that aspect and if available, look at the data after each flight to see what should we continue and how much further and what we were planning to do to be safe, not just for ourselves, but for the aircraft, which themselves in a way were precious, because most of them for that kind of a program and modifications done was kind of a one of a kind. Mm-hmm. So you obviously didn't want to, if you could avoid it, you didn't want to lose the aircraft either.
Hi, folks. Here's Voss here with a little station break. Hope you're enjoying the show so far. We'll resume here in a second. I'd like to invite you to come to my coaching, speaking, and training courses website. You can also see our new podcast over there at chrisvossleadershipinstitute.com. Over there, you can find all the different stuff that we do for speaking engagements if you'd like to hire me, training courses that we offer, and coaching for leadership, management, entrepreneurism, podcasting, corporate stuff. With over 35 years of experience in business and running companies as CEO, I think I can offer a wonderful breadth of information and knowledge to you or anyone that you want to invite me to for your company. Thanks for tuning in. We certainly appreciate you listening to the show, and be sure to check out chrisvossleadershipinstitute.com. Now back to the show. Yeah. And this is at a time where there's a lot of stuff going on. Chuck Yeager, I think before you had broken the speed of sound, I think. Is that correct?
Oh, yes. Yeah. Chuck had, in fact, when I arrived, transferred, I left Lewis Research Center, or Glenn, and went to Flight Research Center at Edwards Air Force Base, where NASA had, I call it their mecca of flight test. X-15 program was going on. Unfortunately, I didn't ever get to fly it. And I did go off for a year to a school, the ARPS School, Aerospace Research Pilot School, Air Force program. And Chuck Yeager was the commandant. He was the boss of that school at the time. And that was a very good experience in my career.
Mm-hmm. And then how do you transition into getting with NASA and of course, preparing to become an astronaut? That's a whole new level of flying through the air.
Well, for me, see, I was already a NASA employee, so it was just another transfer to another center. In that case, it was Manned Spacecraft Center, which is now Johnson Spacecraft Center, named after President Johnson. Mm-hmm. And I had to apply just like any of those who applied. NASA put out a notice for new applicants, and I I filled out a form that you listed references and described work you were into and what you were doing, and applied. Now, the military had a little different process. They would apply within their services, be it the Air Force or Marine Corps and Navy. And the services themselves would choose from those that applied who they would give to NASA to pick. Mm-hmm. So they kind of went through a first filter to get to NASA to be have an option of being selected. So that was kind of the process. You went through a physical, pretty extensive physical down at the Brooke Air Force facility in San Antonio. And there was a few days of, call it writing x-rays, essay type things about space. And you went before a board of people at Houston for the final selection. And then NASA made their choices, and that was announced at a later time.
Mm-hmm. And this is just amazing what was going on during that time. You know, Kennedy prior had announced the space race. We're doing all these, we're doing all this stuff to get more and more people up on the moon. And at some time during this, I mean, are you under the understanding that when you transfer over that, yeah, I want to go into space, I could be an astronaut, or did you have that vision yet? You were just kind of like, well, let's see how this turns out.
No. The reason I applied for the astronaut program, frankly, I thought about it quite a bit and didn't apply it about a month before I could apply. Because I was really enjoying what I was doing at Flight Research Center. I was flying almost every day, flying quite a different variety of aircraft, involved in, at any given time, maybe in 3 test programs, one where I'd be as the primary pilot, others I might be just one of the support pilots, like on the X-15 program, chasing or checking the weather for their launch. Checking uprange lake beds the day before or so before the launch that they were all okay if they had to make an emergency landing, and maybe be a subject pilot on a different kind of a test program where they needed people to do evaluations. So that was, it was very interesting. It was like I said, a lot of flying, good flying. In fact, I put this in the book. Neil Armstrong was ahead of me about 3 years. He joined NASA at Lewis, and Neil went to Edwards Air Force Base. Now, he got to fly the X-15. And then he went into the astronaut program, and he came back to visit the Flight Research Center, which now is named Armstrong, incidentally, after Neil. And Don Malik and I, another research pilot there, talked to Neil. And he asked him, well, what's it like, Neil, being down there in Houston in the astronaut program? And he said, you sit in a lot of meetings, you sit in the simulator a lot, and you don't get much good flying. Of course, he was addressing the kind of flying I was doing and he had done when he was at Flight Research Center with a variety of aircraft and a variety of programs. And it kind of set me back thinking, well, do I really want to go down there to Houston with Neil? And but the more I thought about it on 2 accounts. One is the premier program at the time for us at Flight Research Center was the X-15 program. And in our pilot's office, when you might work your way to fly the X-15 depended on your seniority. And I had about 3 people ahead of me in seniority. So I figured I'd probably never get to fly the X-15 before the program ended. And then I looked, on the other hand, at the evolving Apollo program, and it was going to take people to the moon. And I thought, well, boy, that'd be a pretty exciting adventure.
Oh, yeah.
So I decided that's what it was to me. You were just going to go a little higher, a little faster. And so I said, well, I think I'll sign up. So I did and was chosen.
That would make a great name for a book. A little higher, a little faster. Just a little higher, just a little faster. Why did you choose the name of the title on your book? I mean, I think might know why, but I'd love to hear it from you. Never Panic Early. What made you choose that title?
Well, it's kind of a thing that you come to when you have problems, and even before I was flying. I mean, it's something people deal with in everyday life with circumstances where they have a car wreck or they have an injury in the family. If you have something bad happen, you got choices of what to do. You can maybe act too quickly and do the wrong thing and make things a lot worse. Mm-hmm. Or you can hesitate and look at the situation. In the case of an aircraft or a spacecraft, look at the data you have available on the instrument panel or otherwise, and logically think about what next to do to help the situation or solve the situation. And so it's kind of a thing people should address more and not, like I say, not panic and in their haste do something that's bad and actually worsens the situation. But stop a few seconds, maybe or a minute or so, and think about what should I really do to better the situation.
You know, and that's the interesting thing about the field that you were in, and pilots and astronauts, and you know, they're trained to deal with the emergency situations or when things go bad, and how not to lose your cool, and how to, you know, process, okay, what are the steps that we need to do? And, you know, that enables people like, the Sully, thing in New York where, you know, you had to land the plane very quickly and go through the process. And a lot of times where, you know, you probably needed that sort of training when in the Apollo 3, or 13, issue that took place.
Yeah. We got a lot of that kind of training in a thing called, sessions called integrated simulations. Mm-hmm. This is where we would be in our primary simulators, which at the time were located at Kennedy Space Center. The capsule, command module, and the landing craft, geometrically were exactly like the real vehicles. You laid in the couches and the command module trainer. Although if we weren't wearing spacesuits, we cheated and used some cushions. The couches were hard, and stood up in the lunar module, and they functioned through computer emulation, all the systems just like they would in reality if the vehicle was operating, or all the right meter readings for whatever you were doing at the time. You had a good, reasonable visual out the window to see Earth horizon, star field, very accurate. That sort of thing, but also within the capability was the capability of simulating failures, mm-hmm. and a large number. And the command module simulator, I think, had a repertoire of over 500.
Wow! Holy crap!
Credible system failures, and the lunar module upwards of like 300. Yeah. Now, the way these things were run was there was behind the scenes a group called SimSoup, who was a group of people that knew the vehicles well, the systems, and they spent a lot of time thinking about for each of the runs we made, be they launches or entries or landing on the moon or going in and out of lunar orbit, those sorts of things. They dreamt up the best suite of failures to input, and they selected the timing of when they would be input by the simulator operators during our runs. And they took great glee and felt they had success if they made us look bad. And I say us, the crew or mission control, and handling these problems that were set up. Wow. And we went through thousands of hours of this kind of training. Wow. So you were pretty well steeped in feeling by the time you got to fly that, well, I probably can handle anything that's going to come up.
There you go.
Going through all this training. And, of course, on board we had what we call malfunction procedures that for a given warning light coming on, you could grab the book, and it was kind of like a yes-no, a logic trail you would follow in this diagram that could eventually, if you didn't have it off the top of your head, could lead you to the resulting problem of the cause of the light and what to do.
And imagine these were super important after the loss of the crew of Apollo 1. Had they predicted what ended up happening on the flight of Apollo 13?
They had in terms of the design through the whole design phase, particularly led by reliability engineering. They do what's called FEMAs, FMEAs, failure mean effects analysis, on every valve, failed open, failed closed, every wire shorted or open.
Wow.
And every component like that. And that influences the design along the way. That might, if the manifestation that's written as the result of the failure is too bad, it might result in adding redundancy. I'm talking about very early in the design, or adding a little later on. It gets harder to start adding redundancy when you're getting ready to build it. But more telemetry or procedures that we say, well, we can work around it. So that's done, and explosions were considered. Primarily, I think the major culprit was thought to be probably rocket engines, which had that occasion to happen a few times.
Yeah.
And, of course, the cryogenics, the same way, the oxygen, hydrogen. And the manifestation of that kind of a failure happening, if you read the failure mean effects analysis, it would say you're going to lose the vehicle and you'll lose the crew.
Wow.
So the Apollo 13, we had an explosion just in one oxygen tank 2. And the situation now was we were still alive. They didn't lose the crew. So we gave them a problem to deal with. If it had gone by the FEMAs, they would have not had the problem.
So they'd anticipated that you guys would have been lost by that happening.
Right.
Wow. Well, I'm glad you survived. We should probably note that as we talked in the green room, right now, 52 years ago, you would be flying through the air and under that mission. Do you often think about how surreal that is when you go back? Do you go back and go, holy crap, like I can't believe, just think about that, of what, I
don't feel about it that way. What I feel about it is, how much is still being, talked about and how much, many talks I give to schools, give it to conventions, you name it, any number of types. And how interested people still are in that. It's almost like a folk tale, I guess, that is in people's minds, an interesting story. And, of course, it had the virtue of a happy ending. And so that's what's surprising to me. That's 52 years, a long time ago.
Yeah. People love a comeback story.
Yeah.
So I think in the book, there's been lots of movies and stuff written about it. And of course, Hollywood has to take, they always take some umbrage to different things. Do you get to correct some of the things in the movies maybe got wrong?
No, I had nothing to do with the filming or the movie, actually, the making of the movie. I did meet, one day, I brought in lunch. I was running a subsidiary company of Grumman Corporation at the time. I had a visit from Ron Howard, and he brought his young daughter, and Tom Hanks came, and the producer, and I hosted them in an office I had down by Kennedy Space Center off-site. And they had a book, and they sort of flipped the pages and went through. By that time, they had reviewed all the data NASA had given them, I guess the mission report. And I found out later that it actually gave them all the air to ground that Ron claimed he listened to for the whole flight. And they had a list of questions to ask me about things, I think kind of getting maybe my reading a little bit between the lines, because they also had Jim Lovell's book that had been published at that time, initially called Lost Moon. And I think on a reprint, they labeled it Apollo 13. But at any rate, I went through those questions with him. And the second visit was made by Ron with photographers to look at locations out at Kennedy. They sort of had planned for certain shoots. Mm-hmm. And he brought along Bill Paxton, who was going to play my role. And I took Bill on kind of a tour of Kennedy, a blue ribbon tour that day. But this was months before they ever started filming. Mm-hmm. But once that happened, I was not involved. Now, Jim attended, I think, the set once or even twice, and they actually had him in the movie. He was the captain, Navy captain on the ship when the movie actors were covered at the end of Apollo 13 story.
Did they get it right in the movies? Was there anything maybe you covered in the book that maybe they didn't get right?
Well, the things they did was, I call it some exaggerations or drama that really didn't happen. They had, I was space sick. Mm-hmm. I got too big a hurry after I got first on orbit. I had to gather film and cameras, both movie camera, video cameras, the stills, and all of that, and brackets to put in the windows to mount stuff. And they were all under the couch on the floor. And I had to rotate, and I was rapidly doing that to gather all that equipment because I was anxious to be looking out the window. And that's 3 times. And people warned me that you should not move too fast for a while till you get used to zero gravity. And I up-chucked, but it was like a spit-up. I had a bag in the pocket we always carried, and I captured it so I didn't mess up anything. And, of course, they had Bill Paxton hack it up. It looked like a whole thing of chocolate pudding in the movie. Sort of an exaggeration. But nevertheless, they had a crew argument that did not happen. Jack and I about stirring the cryos. If I had not been still putting away things from the TV show we had just staged, I would have been in the right couch position, and I would have been the one to throw the switches. Mm-hmm. Jack, and so there was no way of knowing that electric short was going to happen. Yeah. So they had to add that in, and they grossly exaggerated the manual maneuvers we did. We did 2 maneuvers without a computer on the way home to change the trajectory a little bit, tweak it, and we didn't move more than a degree or 2. Wow. And of course, in the one scene, they had the Earth going up and down in the window like we're about to lose control. I questioned Ron about that, some of that, and it was funny, his answer. He said, and that's how I know, he said, I listened to all the air-to-ground transmissions, and he said, it never seemed to me like you ever had a problem. Wow. So I said to humanize you in some way. And that's why some of that was put in.
It sounds like you guys really had some.
Overall, I think the movie obviously told a great story of we were in trouble. There's no question about it, deep trouble. And it showed the team, that's another drawback. There was not as big a team as really worked the problems. Mm-hmm. Much more than one shift of mission control, Gene Kranz's white team. And to work the problems, many got less sleep on the ground talking to him afterwards than I got in flight, and came up with solutions that got us home. Yeah.
Did ever during the whole experience you get worried, like, I don't think we're going to get out of this? It sounds like you guys were probably in more control of what was going on than what was on the ground. We're like, we're fine up here. We'll make it.
Well, we were fine in stages. Nobody, including Mission Control, knew the end yet. It's the same kind of work in increments, trying to just stay ahead and get to a better posture. That's what they initially did. Well, first of all, get us pointed in the right direction to even get back to Earth. Yeah. Then they did a second maneuver they figured out after passing the moon to cut some time off. So they cut the corner. So to speak, and bought 10 hours off the return, mainly to enable better to have the power left in the batteries and the water supply in the LEM, which were both critical. Yeah. Oxygen was not, incidentally. That was, I think, later I saw a newscast that they were really worried about oxygen. We had 2 full backpacks, that we were going to use when we landed on the moon.
Oh.
Full up, and they both had emergency bottles on them with very high pressure oxygen to take care of the hole in the suit.
Mm-hmm.
Possibly 6,000 psi. Each of those was about a day's worth.
Oh, so.
Yeah, that we could have used through purge valve in the suit. So we had lots of, I didn't even ever calculate that even when Jim asked me to look at consumables at one point.
Did you ever cross your mind thinking about maybe your life? I don't know if you were married or had kids at the time, or, just thinking about it, just even a blip where you're like, well, what if this doesn't work out?
No, you think about that, normally before you leave. It's kind of a practice. When I was in military squadrons, you normally had a designee, not necessarily designated, but it was obvious your best friend or who you were with in the squadron that was going to take care of the family and the wife, if administrative part of things, if you did make it back one day. And before Apollo 13, Jerry Carr lived around the corner from where I lived in a little community. And he was a fellow Marine, active duty Marine at the time. And I asked Jerry to, as really a designee, he said, you're the point person to watch after the family if I don't get back.
Wow.
I had him at the house, even show him where things might be he'd need to get at. But again, mostly administrative, because obviously that when that happened, as it happened on Apollo 1, the families had a lot of support of other astronauts, of other astronaut wives, NASA protocol people. So it was just, he was kind of the lead person to make sure things got taken care of. So you prepare ahead of time that you might not get back.
It's interesting, the whole mental stoicism that you guys have, and the preparedness, I guess, a lot of it went into. Do you guys know how glued America or the world was to their TV sets and cheering for you guys' return? And what was it like to come back and be a hero?
Well, I tell you, that was the one shocker that I'd never thought about in joining the astronaut program, was that the public attention. And it really came to me. I was a backup on Apollo 8. Mm-hmm. First time we went to the moon, I was backed up Bill Anders, and I was just amazed that when they got back, and I started reading newspapers and looking at news, and then looking at the trip they had planned, sort of not around the world, but a long set of visitations at different countries. And I said, "Wow!" I said, when I flew test airplanes, I didn't get this kind of attention. Even with the X-15, I mean, it wasn't anywhere near the degree it was in Apollo days. So that was a real shocker of sort of a part of the job, being an astronaut, that I had not thought of before I signed up and became one.
Mm-hmm. Was it fairly easy to adapt to the hero role when you came back, where people were, really, I mean, everybody knew your name. Everyone was watching the TVs. Everyone was like, hoping that that you guys would get back safely?
Well, it was easy because, you were really telling the story you were living.
Yeah.
So, it was easy in that respect. I frankly, my public speaking was limited to a class I did of that in junior college, community college. And then we did get what was called the week in the barrel, where you became a rookie astronaut, where you were at the hands of headquarters NASA. They had prearranged a week full of events, mm-hmm. Sometimes 2 a day, three a day even, all kinds of events. Visit schools, have dinner, banquet type events, whatever. So they wanted to get you exposed rapid fire into being in the public and to speaking. And of course, speaking again subject was easy. It was, in my case, was to tell about the Apollo program that I was hoping to join and be a part of and fly.
Wow.
So, it wasn't wasn't as tough as a politician might have and what they might have to think about talking about. So, but they gave you at least that conditioning before later you ended up with some of your own different kinds, but later public events.
What made you finally get it around to writing a book about your memoir? I mean, see, everybody seems to have written a book, and
well, I finally got what I called maybe more free time than I had because I followed my 20 years in NASA. I was 17 years with aerospace companies, Grumman Corporation, and then later Northrop Grumman. I ran space programs for Grumman for 4 years. Then I went off and formed a service company that wanted to get in the service business. And when Northrop and Grumman merged, I inherited their service company, which was doing similar type of government contracting. And so I ended up running for 17 years, during those 17 years, two service companies. Mm-hmm. And I got retired then in 1996. And almost immediately went to work on the board of directors of to build Infinity Science Center. It's a museum in Mississippi where I grew up, actually right at the exit off of Interstate 10 that adjoins the museum on the south side and the Mississippi State Welcome Center with Stennis Space Center, which is the place where all the rocket engines are tested. Mm-hmm. So that was, we obviously had a challenge. It was a not-for-profit board formed that I joined with the goal of raising initially $40 million.
Wow.
Because this was a museum built from scratch. NASA gave us 18 acres of land on a 30-year land use agreement. And from there on, it was up to us. Mm-hmm. So that I spent a lot of time, and still do, in fundraising. For the museum, because it's suffered, as most museums have, badly through the COVID.
Yeah,
a fair drop in attendance that's happened across the country. All museums, for the most part, are not-for-profits, which, as you know, always hunting for money.
And then you eventually went on and played a key role in the space shuttle program.
Well, that was still with Grumman. Mm-hmm. We won a contract. Actually, it was the first major contract for the service company that we had formed. And I was teamed with Lockheed, was the prime contractor, and Thiokol and Grumman were the subs. And so that contract I was involved with for 12 years. Mm-hmm. Turning around space shuttles after they land from space and getting them ready for the next launch. Mm-hmm. The other major contract I was on for 4 years, and actually left the company because it was set up as a separate entity, and for that contract was to I had to move to Washington and led the system engineering integration contract on Space Station. Mm-hmm. In this case, it was called Space Station Freedom before it became later the ISS. And those were tough years. That was probably the hardest job and contract I had, and I label at the end of that segment of the chapter, I call it my time in purgatory. And mainly not the job itself, which was interesting and fun, even the restructuring we had to do, but it was mainly the frustration with achieving and keeping congressional funding. Mm-hmm. It was a struggle every year through those 4 years. In fact, one year, if one vote had changed in the House of Representatives, we would have no space station today.
Wow.
And of course, it was a big morale issue with the workforce I had, reading that in the Washington Post and the periodicals. Integration offices I had at 4 NASA centers on that contract. I was afraid I was going to be losing the workers. I just, in some cases, going all around the country to recruit. So that was a tough contract job from that standpoint, more than the actual hands-on work trying to get the space station ready to get to eventually to build it.
Yeah. I grew up building Estes rockets, and I built a space shuttle, the little rocket versions of it. And I used to love shooting those off with my friends when I was 11. And, the whole dream of astronaut travel and space. The ability for the space shuttle to return, and land like a plane, was really innovative to changing what was going on. I was really honored, years ago that, NASA brought me and a bunch of people to, the California base there up in the desert, and we got to see the Endeavour land and go tour the 747 that carries it around. And we were literally within, 8 feet of being able to reach out and touch the space shuttle. It was just extraordinary just to think about the journeys that thing had been on. Well, what do you think about how the space shuttle program has evolved, where we now have these easily return landable things that can come back and forth like SpaceX and stuff?
Well, obviously SpaceX has had tremendous success.
Mm-hmm.
They had some hard early years, the first several launches. And in fact, I think they're about ready to throw in the towel when they finally got funding to continue and got a successful launch. It's been very great ever since. And they've had a methodology of return of the booster that has lessened the cost considerably, and reuse. I think the crews that have flown in the capsule equivalent, the Dragon, they reused it. It was the same vehicle they used again for the next flight. So that added something the shuttle didn't have, was the promise of, let's say, not cheap, but certainly a lot cheaper capability of getting things up and down.
Mm-hmm.
The shuttle, that was the one promise that failed. It was really never made it to sort of being the low cost way of getting things up and down. It was a very innovative vehicle, though, in a sense you mentioned that it could carry things up. It could retrieve them if you wanted to bring them back home. It could get things and repair them like they did Space Telescope. So it has certain capabilities that we don't have with anything else we have yet today.
Yeah.
And so that's lost, that kind of capability. But it was a very expensive system to operate, took a lot of manpower, which is probably the biggest recurring cost for shuttle, was the payroll, the labor force.
Yeah, they just delivered 2 days ago the first, SpaceX delivered the first alt-private astronaut crew to the ISS station.
Yeah.
Isn't that crazy?
Yeah, and that's it's been so perfect. I mean, and hopefully they're not going to change anything. They have a sort of a singular mission. It's to go up, rendezvous, and dock with the space station, and come back and do an Earth orbital reentry. And if they don't mess with anything and try to make it better, like better software or something, mess something up, it's obviously the reliability has been tremendous.
As long as
again, the only thing they face is failures potentially, like again, the rocket engines.
Yeah.
The arc. The other one that gets you on a recurring thing like they're doing is complacency. Complacency and the preparation and that sort of thing that happens in squadrons. If you get complacent, somewhere you'll have an accident, pilot error, or whatever be the cause, that you can trace it back to that factor.
And in your book, you talk about another challenge that you go through, where you end up ferrying a World War II aircraft. Do you want to touch on that a little bit? Tease that out.
Yes, I was involved with an operation that did air shows, and the opening act was the semblance of the attack on Pearl Harbor. We had some pyrotechnics in the center of the field that got set off, that kind of thing, and used airplanes that had been acquired very cheaply from 20th Century Fox. They had converted a number of aircraft to resemble Japanese aircraft, and making their movie Toro, the attack on Pearl Harbor. A very good movie, in fact.
Yeah.
And so we just used them to stage that air show. And I really picked up the Val, which was the name for the Japanese dive bomber, which had nice fancy pants on the wheels and different cowling on it to give that resemblance, and a good paint job. to look like the Japanese valve. And we kept it at a crop duster's field. And I always picked it up to ferry it to Shoals Field at Galveston, Texas, where we had a wash rack to clean it up because we had an air show coming up the weekend at Dallas-Fort Worth area. And I was too close on another airplane I was flying formation on. In fact, Ted Mendenhall, he was one of our shuttle training aircraft pilots. And I got too close on him, and I was afraid of running over him on the runway and getting too close. And I did a go around, and about 300 foot in the air, the engine quit.
Oh.
And by rapidly changing tanks to the other fuel tank, and I had a hand wobble pump I could pump to get fuel pressure. I could get it to sputter, which enabled me to make a 180-degree turn away from the water because I was headed landing south into the Gulf of Mexico. And I knew it was shallow water. You don't want to land. This was a fixed gear airplane. I couldn't raise the gear.
Yeah.
And I knew it'd probably flip over and I'd end up upside down, trapped in shallow water. So I wilted around 180 degrees, but landed. And it did not have any shock absorbing except the tires because the fancy pants they put on, they also bolted plates on the oleos so they could not strut.
Oh, wow.
Move to give you some landing support. And one landing gear came off on impact. It flipped, the wing dug in, and ended up going upside down backwards and trapped for a little while with it on fire. Fortunately, a nice blue flame, not yet a lot of smoke with oil, which would be bad for breathing.
Yeah.
I managed to kick a hole through the flimsy canopy that was on those World War II airplanes and got out. But in the meantime, I'd had fire burn legs and arms and part of my rear end where I had to stick it in the fire. And had burns over about 65%.
Wow.
Half second, half third, and ended up 3 months in the 1 week short of 3 months in the Galveston University of Texas hospital and treated for at least a grafting by Shrine doctors. Right next door was the Shrine Burn Institute and for children. And they also serviced the adult ward and did mentoring for doctors, the University of Texas doctors who were budding to be maybe plastic surgeons.
Mm-hmm. So
I got that support during my stay in the Galveston UT. University of Texas Hospital, and I was careful not to let any of the people know I went to the University of Oklahoma.
That's hilarious. That's hilarious. And you have a miraculous recovery from that. I mean, that's 65% of your body. Jeez.
Yeah, that was at that day and age. This was 73. That was quite a high number for an adult of my age, anyway. And the children, they were at that time they were surviving at 90, a little over 90%. Mm-hmm. And but at any rate, I met with the doctors early on after the first critical phase. They worry about if you breathed any hot gases that might have damaged your respiratory system, because if you've done that, there's no recovery.
Mm-hmm.
And we got past that, and I talked to the internist and Dr. Larson, who was the prime doctor from the Shrine Institute that was going to do the grafting work, and told him I wanted to get back to flight status. And so we talked over what protocol was going to be. And the one thing that looked like we should do something different was because I had burns all the way around the legs.
Mm-hmm.
I got the grafting. They don't want pressure on the grafts for 5 days.
Mm-hmm.
And so they're going to put a pins through the ankles and hoist my legs up in the air so there'd be no pressure on the legs during that period. And we thought about, well, it might leave holes in the bones, that gap of some kind that might cause the problem flying again with pressure differential.
Oh, yeah.
Going up and down. So what I had, the wife bought a pair of sandals that could be easily strapped on my feet, and took them to delivered them to Crew Systems Division at Johnson Space Center. And the suit techs actually fixed a board with Velcro and glued on the bottom of the sandals matching Velcro. That enabled me to clamp my feet into that board at the end of the bed and avoid the use of the pins.
Wow.
And so that's one workaround we did. Otherwise, the other things done during that period were pretty much the standard that was done. The worst of all was getting dunked in a diluted Clorox tank, tank every day.
Oh, wow.
Instead of preventing infection.
Yeah, yeah.
And you had to stay in there 17 minutes. They had a clock that set on the wall. You could watch the 17 minutes go by. As it seemed like pain got worse as the longer you were in there.
Yeah, I can imagine. I burn when, I put a little hydrogen peroxide on a hangnail.
Right, yeah.
That's the end of the world for me right there.
Yeah.
You're a tough man. And have you ever thought that maybe you got a little like Cat 9 Lives sort of thing going on there?
I hadn't quite used all 9 of them yet.
Yeah. Well, you got 7 left, but you've had a couple close calls there, probably more than most people.
Yes, I have, and I just feel very blessed to have survived and been able to continue the career, and been lucky. I mean, it's lucky and blessed to have been able to do what I've done through my life. Like I said, the only job that was unpleasant, as I mentioned, was that 4 years on the early space station. and mainly it wasn't the job itself. It was the dealing with the congressional committees.
Wow.
And the worrying about the funding. In fact, Proxmire at one time, I think, zeroed NASA funding. It quickly got turned around.
Yeah.
Those were not good years. It seemed like the Congress didn't hear Reagan's message when he was the one that kicked off space station and gave a nice talk about the wonders of what this laboratory was going to do, but Congress wasn't listening.
Yeah. Have you booked any flights for Mars? Elon Musk wants to go to Mars.
No, that's too long a trip, and that's a long trip. That's going to be a tough thing to do from that aspect. And I know Elon's interested in having a permanent establishment in the city. Logistics support, unless you can get through the early time to actually figure out how to live off of Mars itself.
Yeah,
that's going to be the difficult part, that transition. Now, that's one thing about going back to the moon and a moon base. There'll be a lot of learning curve on that aspect. What's the right architecture to provide the logistics support to set up and maintain an operation on the moon, which will be obviously from just the distance away, a lot easier a challenge to contemplate.
Yeah. And you guys were never able to land on the moon in the subsequent missions you went on. You were supposed to be on the moon on Apollo 13. Does that ever bug you? You ever hear any regrets about that? Like, gosh darn it.
Well, not today. It did for a number of years afterwards.
Yeah.
I lost the chance on 19. I had flown as a backup commander on 16 to John Young, and that put me in the lineup to then probably fly 19 with Jerry Carr and Bill Pogue, who were assigned to me early on as the backup crew on 16. And, of course, they canceled it after about 4 or 5 months into that training cycle.
Wow.
And I lost that chance. So it bothered me for a couple of years that I never got the chance to try it again.
Yeah. Well, you've lived a hell of a life. Anything more you want to tease out on the book for people to go out and buy it?
Well, no, it's a good story. I hope beyond the book that people that are currently involved in the program, I mentioned several things that I hope they bother looking up in the archives. Like a fellow named Bill Tyndall did a lot of the what we call data priority sessions to figure out how to do the Apollo lunar mission and what are some of the challenges. And there's a lot of that data. I don't know that because I've not been involved technically with NASA. That some of that has been reviewed, and what they're putting together for Artemis going back to the moon.
Mm-hmm. Well, it'll be pretty interesting. So, thank you for coming on the show. We really appreciate it, Fred. It's been an honor to have you on. Like I said, I grew up just with the whole space race and this whole space age, and so it was really fun to have you on the show.
Well, thank you. Thank you for having me. I enjoyed it.
Thank you.
About the old days.
Thank you very much. You're an American treasure, my friend. To my audience, go pick up the book. You can order it wherever fine books are sold. Never Panic Early. And Apollo 13's extraordinary astronaut's journey. Extraordinary is one thing I added to that title. So go pick up the book and check it out today and read more about Fred's extraordinary life. Thanks so much for tuning in. Go to youtube.com/Chris Voss. Go to goodreads.com/Chris Voss. See everything we're reading and reviewing over there as well. Thanks for being here. Stay safe. Be good to each other. And we'll see you guys next time.
All right. Take care.